In a desolate, dry land where the fields no longer yielded crops and the rivers had evaporated, there stood a man fearless, like a beacon in the midst of darkness. This man was Elijah, the prophet of God, a man of the desert, rough in appearance with a fiery spirit. The hot afternoon wind brushed against his face as he gazed toward the horizon, witnessing the consequences of his own prophecy. Elijah's story begins at a time of spiritual and moral decay. King Ahab of Israel had married Jezebel, a Phoenician princess who brought with her the worship of Baal, a foreign god who would capture the hearts of the people of Israel. The land was full of idolatrous altars, and the word of God seemed distant, almost forgotten. The people had abandoned true worship and had given themselves over to idolatry. Fearless, Elijah challenged this spiritual decay. In a meeting with King Ahab, the prophet, with a firm voice and without hesitation, declared, "As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there will be neither dew nor rain for the next few years except at my word." With these words, Elijah brought God's judgment upon the land. The prophecy was fulfilled. The sky was shut up. No more rain, no more dew. The land became dry, and the people, who had relied on Baal to bring rain, now faced the consequences of their unfaithfulness. After delivering this prophecy, God instructed Elijah to hide, for he too would be targeted by the wrath of Ahab and Jezebel. The prophet was guided to the brook Cherith, where God provided for him. The brook provided fresh water, and ravens brought him bread and meat to sustain him every day. During this time, Elijah experienced a deep trust in God's provision, but he also found himself immersed in solitude. He was far from everyone, in a quiet place where God spoke to him in a personal and intimate way. However, the brook Cherith dried up. The drought was complete. The desert surrounding Elijah seemed to want to swallow everything. When the water from the brook dried up, the Lord spoke to Elijah again, saying, "Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there. I have commanded a widow there to provide for you." Elijah followed the Lord's command and went to Zarephath. Upon arrival, he found a widow who was gathering sticks to make her last piece of bread. The scene was one of despair, a woman who was about to die with her son, as she had no more food, no more hope. Elijah asked her for water and a piece of bread. The woman, her face marked by pain and the struggle for survival, replied with deep sadness, "As surely as the Lord your God lives, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Elijah, moved by her situation, said, "Do not be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." The woman, with a thread of hope in her heart, did as Elijah asked. And indeed, the flour did not run out, and the oil did not run dry. Throughout the entire drought, she, her son, and Elijah himself were sustained by the miracle of God's provision. God had spoken in a silent yet powerful way through the prophet's words, and the miracle extended to all who believed. But the desert had not yet ended for Elijah. Although the Lord had provided for him and the widow, the situation was still bleak. The people were in the midst of a devastating drought, and the worship of Baal continued to be the norm among most. However, Elijah was not afraid. He knew that his God was greater than the circumstances, and that God's power did not depend on human strength or the situation at hand. Days passed in Zarephath, where the flour never ran out, and the oil never ceased. However, Elijah's desert journey was far from over. The heart of the widow and her son were sustained by God's providence, but something even deeper was about to unfold. Elijah's story wasn't just about surviving the drought. It was about understanding the depth of trust in God and the supernatural power that manifests even in the most difficult circumstances. One day, the widow's son fell ill and over time died. Despair overwhelmed the woman, and in her grief, she went to Elijah and, with tears in her eyes, exclaimed, "What do you have to do with me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" She was desperate, feeling abandoned by both God and the man who had brought hope and provision to her home. Elijah, moved by the woman's pain, took the boy into his arms and went up to the room where the child lay. He knelt before God and fervently prayed, "O Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even upon this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die?" Elijah wasn't just crying out for a miracle. He was interceding for a child's life, believing that God could raise the dead. With faith, he stretched himself over the child 3 times, praying to God to restore his life. And the Lord heard his prayer. The child's life returned to him, and Elijah descended with the boy in his arms, proclaiming to the widow, "See, your son lives." The woman, amazed and moved, fell at Elijah's feet and declared, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." The miracle not only brought life to the widow's son, but also restored her faith in God and in His word. She saw, through a divine act of power, that the Lord was with Elijah and that His word carried authority. But the restoration of the widow's faith wasn't the culmination of Elijah's mission. He knew that the task God had given him was still incomplete. The sky remained closed, and the drought continued to ravage Israel. The people were still lost in their idolatry, worshiping Baal, and the empire of Ahab and Jezebel grew stronger each day. Elijah knew that something more had to happen. Then the Lord spoke again to Elijah, "Go, present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land." This command from God was more than just an instruction. It was a call to a final showdown between the God of Israel and Baal, the false god who had been worshipped for so many years. Elijah, obedient, made his way to meet Ahab. When the king saw him, he accused him, saying, "Is it you, the one who troubles Israel?" Elijah, with courage, responded, "I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, because you have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals." The moment of confrontation had arrived. Elijah challenged Ahab to gather all the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, so that the true God could be demonstrated in power. The challenge was clear. 2 altars would be prepared, and each side would call upon their God to send fire from heaven. The God who answered with fire would be the true God. King Ahab, hearing Elijah's words, had no choice but to accept the challenge. He gathered the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, and they all made their way to Mount Carmel for the showdown. The people of Israel were called to gather as well, for it was time to make a definitive decision about who they would worship. When they arrived at Mount Carmel, Elijah spoke to the people. "How long will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." The people remained silent, not answering a word. They were divided, unsure of who to believe. Elijah then took his place and prepared the altar. He placed 12 stones, 1 for each tribe of Israel, and prepared the sacrifice, placing the lamb on the wood. He instructed them to dig a trench around the altar and fill it with water, so that there would be no doubt that the fire couldn't be caused by any human trickery. The prophets of Baal began to cry out to their God, dancing and cutting themselves until blood flowed. But there was no answer. The day passed, and the silence continued. Elijah, with a tone of irony, mocked them. "Shout louder! Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." When the afternoon came, Elijah ordered that the water be poured onto the altar. Then, with calm and faith, Elijah stepped forward, prayed to the Lord, saying, "O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then the fire of God fell from heaven and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and even the water in the trench. The people, astonished, fell prostrate and cried out, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" Elijah, seeing that the people had finally turned back to the true God, ordered that the prophets of Baal be captured and killed. The false god had been defeated. The worship of the Lord was restored, and God, in his mercy, sent rain upon the land, breaking the drought that had devastated Israel. After the great miracle on Mount Carmel, Elijah, with his renewed faith, hoped that the people of Israel would finally turn back to God. But what happened was the opposite. Queen Jezebel, furious over Baal's defeat and the death of his prophets, swore vengeance on Elijah, telling him that he would be killed the next day. Elijah, disillusioned and fearful, felt the weight of failure and persecution. Elijah fled to save his life, crossing the desert and going to Beersheba in the land of Judah. There he left his servant behind and alone, journeyed further into the desert to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The pain of rejection and the fear of death overwhelmed his heart, and Elijah, having no strength left, lay down under a broom tree and prayed for death. "It is enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." Loneliness and despair completely consumed him. He felt his mission had failed, his struggle was in vain, and there was no reason to continue. Elijah's anguish is something many of us can relate to in our darkest moments. The great prophet of God was in crisis, in doubt, asking to be taken away, feeling utterly useless. But God, in his mercy, did not abandon him. Instead of giving him what he asked for, the Lord sent an angel to care for him. The angel touched Elijah and said, "Get up and eat." By his side was a loaf of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. Elijah ate and drank, and strengthened. He lay down again. The angel of the Lord visited him once more and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." Elijah, now strengthened, continued his journey to Mount Horeb, where he hid in a cave. There, he waited to hear a word from God. He was seeking answers, a sign, clear direction for his life. And it was in this solitary place, where Elijah was physically tired and spiritually confused, that God met him in a surprising way. The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord." And when Elijah went out of the cave, a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before him. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard the gentle whisper, he covered his face with his cloak and went out to the entrance of the cave. In that moment, God was teaching him a vital lesson. He is not always in the great displays of power or grand events, but often in moments of silence, calm, and reflection. Sometimes, God speaks more clearly in the silence than in all the noise and chaos of the world. It is when we are willing to listen carefully and sensitively, within ourselves, that we can hear his voice. God then asked Elijah, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with a sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." Elijah felt isolated, believing he was alone in his struggle, that his mission had failed, and there was no one left to support him. But God did not allow Elijah to sink into hopelessness. He gave him a new mission and a new purpose. God told him to go back to the desert of Damascus, to anoint Hazael as king over Aram, Jehu as king over Israel, and Elisha as his prophet in his place. God revealed to Elijah that he was not alone, that there were still 7,000 in Israel who had not bowed down to Baal or kissed him. The message God was giving to Elijah was clear. God's work does not depend on just one man. He has his plans and always has a faithful remnant. Even when we feel like our mission is failing or that we are alone, God is working in ways we often cannot perceive. After this deep and transformative experience, Elijah returned and anointed Elisha as his successor. Elijah's mission was far from over. He had experienced the desert, loneliness, fear, but also God's touch in moments of weakness and fragility. He had encountered not only a God of great miracles, but also a God who speaks in the silence, in the whisper of the gentle breeze.